Hear me.
Вот скажи мне, американец, в чем сила?
А вы что, собираетесь на ней жениться?
Да.
Ух, красота-то какая, лепота.
Таможня дает добро.
И вообще не называй меня, пожалуйста, Вероникой. Кто я? Вот кто я?
Отныне в русской земле единый быть.
Don't torture me, I can't live without him.
Hi, my name's Ali, and this is the Russophiles Unite podcast, where we watch Russian films and films with a Russian connection. As always, I'm joined by a guest, and today my guest is Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Ali.
Thanks for joining me. So, Mark, before we crack on with the show, could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, delighted to be here, Ali. I've listened to your show quite a bit and big Russian film fan. So I'm an ex-police officer turned writer. Just published my first book in America through Schiffer Books. It's called Thief in Law, and it's basically my work from the police. It's all about the tattoos and the activities of the Russian mafia, what their tattoos mean, what they get up to. Sort of all Russian crime stuff, really.
Okay, cool. So, what was it that attracted you to that subject and kind of gave you that Russian interest?
Well, like most of your guests, I got into Russia when I was a young guy. I came here as a student in the 90s. I first came here in 97, I think, to Moscow. And then I came here to live in 99 when I was, just before I was 19.
Oh, awesome. That is a very young, impressionable age to be moving to a foreign country for the first time, especially Russia, I guess, in terms of places that are different from Britain. That's like a moderate difficulty level. You know, it's not just like, I don't know, going to Denmark or somewhere. It was
tough. I first came here, when I came to live, it was in January in 99. And my first day was about minus 25. And I remember getting here thinking, oh my God, what have I done?
I had a bit of that "what have I done" feeling, and I arrived in very early October. So yeah, January and minus 25. That is pretty much what people sort of stereotypically imagine when they think of Russia, I think.
I tell you what, and I remember the taxi driver who took me from the airport. It was so cold, he had to get his the key out for his Zhiguli and warm it up with a lighter. And I saw that and I thought, oh my God.
I suppose when you look back on it, you think that's resourceful at least. So in terms of where you lived, was that Moscow as well, or was that somewhere else?
No. I first lived in St. Petersburg in 99, and I was here for a year in St. Petersburg, and then I moved to Rostov-on-Don, which is right down in the south, and I spent a year there. So about 2 years I was living in Russia in my younger days.
Okay, and what brought you out there?
I'm sure. Yeah, this is the question everyone asks, isn't it? And
yes,
I had a history teacher at school. My favourite teacher, and he was obsessed with the Soviet Union, and every lesson was about Stalin, Lenin, and I just loved this teacher. His lessons were brilliant, and he poisoned my mind really, and got me into Russia. And then he found me a pen friend, and then I came to visit in '97 when I was, I think I was 15 or 16, and then I came in to live a couple of years later.
Awesome. And I've never actually made it down to Rostov-on-Don. How would you describe that as a place?
Do you know what? Surprisingly, great city. It's on the River Don, and the city's all on the right bank, and it's got lovely main central streets, big park, great weather. Because it's in the south, it's got great food. And the other side of the Don River is like a party. They call it Levy Bereg, the left bank, and it's all karaoke and restaurants. And I'd really recommend Rostov as a place to go. Very, very interesting town.
Yeah, and it was one of the venue cities for the World Cup, which at the time of recording is, just finished on Sunday.
Yeah, we're 3 days out of the World Cup now, and I'm sure any of the guys who went to Rostov had a great time. It's a great place. I recommend it. It's not a place many people get to.
No. In 5 years in Russia, I never made it down that far. So yeah, definitely I will take that recommendation on board. And also, I guess, like you say, probably defies some of the stereotypes about what the climate's going to be like, because people tend to just imagine Moscow.
Oh yeah, I mean, Moscow. I suppose it's a bit like London in the UK, isn't it? London isn't England, and Moscow's not Russia.
Yes, yeah. I when people say, "Oh, you lived there for 5 years, you must know a lot about it," I say, well, you say that, but if somebody lived in London for 5 years, I wouldn't necessarily say they had a particularly objective view of Britain as a whole, No,
absolutely. I was in Moscow. I went for the semi-final because I'm currently in Russia at the moment, working. And I'm here for a few more weeks, and I managed to get to the England-Croatia semi-final in Moscow, and met a friend and had a good look round. It's the first time I've been there in about 7 years, and I was so impressed with what they've done to it.
So how has it changed in that time? I left end of 2014, and in my last couple of years, they'd done quite a lot of work, but it sounds like they've done even more since then.
Well, I met my friend at Taganskaya, and I remember it as being a bit of a dive, that place. But it just looked wonderful. And what he told me is that they banned the garish advertising you used to get everywhere in Russia. There's no more neon lights in the shop windows, and there's none of these giant billboards on top of the nice buildings. And you've got that in St. Petersburg, and you haven't got that in Moscow. And it really does make a difference. That's what my friend said to me. That's one of the big changes. That's
interesting, because I guess I remember there being quite a lot of advertising. Yeah, I don't remember, but one of the other films we've covered, which probably won't go out until after this one has come out, that has a lot. Like, one of the subtext things about the film is the advertising. Which is interesting to say that's something that's changed a lot. Also, the thing that really changed towards the end of my time there was pedestrianising. Great swathes of the city centre. Yes.
What's that street? Is it Nikolaev? Just off Red Square. It's where is it Kitay-Gorod Metro? And they pedestrianised that street, and it was top. And they had all these umbrellas hanging down off it, loads of lights, and I think that's where a lot of the fans were congregating during the World Cup in Moscow.
Gotcha. Yeah. I remember reading quite a bit about the different fan areas. Yeah, so they have worked hard to kind of give it a facelift, but as we've kind of already sort of alluded to in your introduction, we're kind of delving into the seedier side of Russian life, if that's not too cheesy an intro.
No.
Because the film that we're watching today is going to be Brat, or Brother, to give it its English title, and serendipitously enough, that was released in 1997. So when you first travelled to Russia, so that's worked out well.
Absolutely, and it's filmed. I'm staying in St. Petersburg at the moment. I'm in a hotel in Vasilisky Ostrov, and it's all filmed around here. So I remember last time I watched it, thinking, I know that street, I know that tram stop, and
awesome! That must be kind of weird, especially when the subject matter is. The film we're watching today is a gangster film, so I don't know why I'd almost automatically assumed that it was going to be in Moscow. Maybe living there all those years has just made me very Moscow centric. That's awful. But anyway, before we move on, I should mention that the film's directed by Aleksei Balabanov and stars Sergei Bodrov Jr., who I kind of have in my head is kind of like a Russian James Dean of the late 90s / early 2000s, because he died in a tragic ice slide in the Caucasus while shooting another movie. So
yeah, you're right. I'd compare him to James Dean. He only made a few films. The one before this was Prisoner of the Mountains, which was his big breakthrough. And then Brat, when you say about Moscow, Brat 2, Brat 2 is set in Moscow.
Oh, okay.
So that's it's a very different film. Same sort of lines, but it's obviously a lot bigger budget going off the back of this one. But yeah, Bodrov, it's a real shame he died. And I've been to the Caucasus, to Vladikavkaz, where he died, and they never recovered his body. And I think quite a number of the crew died as well in that accident. And it was a real shock to the whole country, because he was the real starlet of the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, and of course his father is as a director, and I believe he's still working actually. So that's kind of almost like it sounds weird to say, because it's obviously it's still a tragedy, but it's someone who I guess, being kind of double famous, like famous in his own right as an actor, but also famous as being the son of somebody who everyone knew as well. I don't know if that...
I'd say he eclipsed his father in terms of fame. And that he's still, there's a bit of graffiti I saw the other day in St. Petersburg of him. There's a still of him, I think it's from the second Black film, or is it from the first one? I'm not sure. Where there's a big graffiti billboard of him holding a shotgun saying, "What is power, brother? Power is truth," or one of the lines from the film.
Okay, so it's potentially a little bit philosophical as well.
Oh, absolutely. I think he's a bit of a Victor Soy type guy, a bit of a legend here, really.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you could draw the comparison, both in terms of dying tragically young and being in gangster films, because, I mean, obviously, Soy primarily known as a musician, but also in a couple of pretty famous / I guess, like, cult Russian movies. I've only seen one of them. I've only seen Asar, but you did a blog piece recently, which I'll link to in the show notes, about your favourite Russian crime / gangster films, and his other one, Igla, the needle, you included in that. So I definitely have to check that one out as well.
I'll tell you what, Alistair, Igla is much better than Asa, I think. Much better.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Oh, wipes the floor with it. Much better. And it's all filmed in Kazakhstan, and it's right at the end of the set. It's really good. Really, really good. I put it in my top 5 top 5 Russian films, full stop.
Oh, awesome. Because, I mean, this may partly be the circumstances under which I saw Asar, but I really liked that film, but I did see it on a big screen, which is kind of ideal, really, and yeah, I liked it. So the fact that you're saying that one's even better means, yeah, I'll have to kind of move it up my timetable for watching.
Oh, please do. I guarantee you'll enjoy it.
Awesome. Okay. Before we start the film, though, I did want to get a little bit into your Russian crime expertise, if that's the right way of phrasing it.
Yeah, sure.
So the title of your book, Thief in Law, is an allusion to the Russian, I guess, expression or description, vori v zakonie, if my Russian pronunciation is a bit rusty, but yeah, so literally thieves in law, but I mean, sometimes I've heard it described as something like a lawful thief. We've kind of covered that a little bit before in a previous episode on a Western film, Eastern Promises, but yeah, for people who haven't caught that one, who are the Vori?
So yeah, the Vori v zakonie is the thieves in law, is what the Russian mafia call themselves. The term Russian mafia, it's a real loose term.
Yeah.
And when I was a police officer in law enforcement, the official term is Russian-speaking organised crime groups, because most of them, well, a good percentage of them aren't actually Russians, but they all speak Russian.
Yeah, sort of lingua franca down there.
Yeah. So the book, because by the time I joined the police in 2003, so I'd already lived in Russia a couple of years, I could speak Russian. And every now and again, when I first joined, we'd get, a Russian speaker would, for some reason come in contact with the police, and if they couldn't speak English, I'd go and talk to them and deal with them. And it wasn't that often, really, when I first started. But after the EU expansion eastwards, we were dealing with Russian-speaking criminals, basically, weekly, sometimes daily, mostly Lithuanian passport holders. Whether they were really Lithuanian or not, it's difficult to say. But dealing with them all the time, from road accidents to a couple of murders, cases I was involved in translating or interviewing. So did that. 2010, I was very active in the International Police Association, which is a big police friendship association all around the world, and I got to come to Russia for a month and work with the Russian police in St. Petersburg for the month, and while working with them, I noticed that, like you say in Eastern Promises, everyone they were dealing with was tattooed. And I'd say, what's this all about? And they were surprised that I didn't know anything about it. So they started teaching me. They gave me a couple of books, and I got quite interested in it. Got back to the UK, got in touch with our training department and said, have we got anything on this I can look at? And they said, no, there's nothing here. Try Interpol. So I called Interpol. They're up somewhere up in the north of England. I can't remember where. And this was just after... Well, this was... When was Litvinenko? Was that 2009?
I want to say 2006-7, maybe.
Okay, so a few years before I'd done it. And so I was speaking to Interpol, and they said, since the Litvinenko thing, we're not working. We don't have any contact with the Russian police. And our Russian desk is covered by the Portuguese section.
Right.
So I spoke to the guy on the Portuguese section, and he said, mate, I don't know anything about this. Try the Americans.
So almost sending you around the houses. Yeah,
so there was nothing in British law enforcement about Russian organised, official training about Russian organised crime or the tattoos or the Vordovazakonya. So these books I'd got given from Russia, I read them, and I made a little training package for my colleagues, just in Hertfordshire where I used to work, just north of London on the M25. That went down quite well. I expanded it. I got approved by the College of Policing. They recommended me to Scotland Yard. I was going down there every 3 months training them. Got put on as part of the detective sergeant training course, so I used to go and do that for 5 different regions, training their new DSs. They recommended me to the Home Office, who recommended me to the American Air Base in Mildenhall, and they ended up recommending me back to America, and I went to Seattle in 2014 to train FBI and DEA agents in it. Germany, how many times I've been to Germany? 3 or 4 times I've trained the Germans. I'm back there in October to train them again. So it really took off.
Yeah, wow. It sounds like you kind of went almost like 0 to 60 quite quickly there.
It took... Well, I started doing it in, say, 2010. And, by within a year, I was at Scotland Yard. And 2014, I was in America. And now I live in America. But get to Russia quite a lot. And I'm doing the talk... hopefully this goes out before September. I'm in London... I'm back in the UK in September, and I'm doing some talks in London, Bristol, Manchester, open to the public.
Oh, awesome.
And everyone's invited. You can find details on my website, markgbullen.com, and Funzing. They're organising the talk, so please come along.
Gotcha. Yeah, definitely check those out if you're within range of any of those. Yeah, I found that really interesting in terms of the dates there, just because, as I've mentioned, Eastern Promises, that came out, I want to say 2007, so I find it very interesting that kind of pop culture / cinema had sort of stolen a march on the police there, which is interesting. But on the other hand, it's really awesome that they supported you, and obviously you were quite enterprising, saying, can I do this, can I develop this, and they were, by the sound of it, sure, go ahead, we need all the help we can get.
I'll knock you back there, Alistair.
Okay.
So I started doing it, and if I was still in the old bill, I'd get in trouble for saying this, but I got called in by the diversity department and got told to stop because I was causing Russian citizens to be treated differently. And I told them that these are major criminals that we have a huge problem with in Europe and the UK, and fortunately I ignored the Hertfordshire diversity person after that, and they stopped me doing it in Hertfordshire, but I still managed to do it in the Met and all around the UK.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wasn't that supported by my own force, unfortunately.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But as far as the specifics of the tattoos themselves, could you just give some examples of like, are there any that are quite common?
No problem. I mean,
sure.
I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'll give you a story of when I used it. So while I'm in Russia now, I'm doing interviews. I'm meeting guys who've been in prison, who've been involved in organised crime. I'm interviewing them, and I'm taking photos of their tattoos, and they're telling me their stories about them. And the last couple of guys, I always ask them, how many guys in prison get tattooed? And they say 80%. It's a real common thing, and it's this greeny, bluey tattoos. Normally start on the hands, on the shoulders, and like you say, in Eastern Promises, there's a lot, and it's like a CV, and you can. This is what the Russian cops told me. It's their resume, and you can look at them, and you can tell what type of criminal they are, their level in the criminal world, quite often where they've been to prison, what part of the country they're from, and you can read all of that just by looking at them. And it's vital for the police, certainly in Russia, and especially now in Europe with the problems we've got. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about Interpol Operation Millennium in a bit. I don't want to get sidetracked, but I'll give you a good example. So after I'd done all my written training course and I just started doing it, I got called to a job in Waltham Cross, which is like the first town after the M25, and it was a Lithuanian guy, Russian speaker. He covered himself in petrol and he's standing in the town centre with a lighter saying he's going to do the obvious, but he couldn't speak English, so I get called down there to talk to him.
Yeah, because it's just some guy screaming and apparently going to light him on fire. Yeah, you definitely want to intervene there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the smell of petrol and it was. So I get called. I get down there, blues and twos, and speak to the guy. It turns out his wife's kicked him out. He's living rough in the park, and he can't be doing it anymore. He's going to kill himself. So anyway, talk him down. Agreed to buy him a Big Mac, and we'll sort it out and get the lighter off him, take him away. So while we've got him in the back of the police van, he's still covered in petrol. So my colleague nips to a charity shop to get him some new clothes because we don't want to be transporting him covered in petrol.
No.
He gets changed, takes his top off, and he's covered in these tattoos. Absolutely covered in them. So I'm saying to him, I'm interested in this. Can you tell me? Very happy to tell me. Kept asking for a cigarette, which I said, for certain reasons you're not having that at the moment, but... That's
not a good idea, yeah.
once you've had your shower, we'll sort that out.
Yeah.
But, so buy him a Big Mac and a coffee, and he tells me about the tattoos, and he's saying, this one shows you I was a burglar, this one shows you I did a life sentence. He had a barbed wire all the way around his neck, and he was telling me each barb was a year served, and you get that for either a very long sentence or a life sentence. So what did you get a life sentence for? And he said, I killed someone in the south of Russia, and I did 11 years of my 20-year sentence. Blimey. He's got the burglar tattoos, he's got a high-ranking thief with a leg on a bag of money. He's got some high-ranking ones. So eventually I sent off the forms to Interpol to get his criminal record from Lithuania and from Russia. And it turns out he killed 2 people, one in Lithuania, one in Russia, and he was a prolific burglar from Lithuania, from, I'm going to say, what was the town? Visaginas, from an eastern town in Lithuania. Prolific burglar. And this guy's living rough in our division, in our area. So we know nothing about this guy. We've got a double murderer, prolific burglar, living in our town that we don't know anything about. So that was the real value of it. And once that happened to me, I saw what I had. I thought, God, this is something that we should know. And after training, I used to get a lot of feedback from my colleagues of the results they'd get from coming across Russian guys with these prison tattoos, investigating them further and finding out what type of people are actually living in the UK.
Yeah, so in for some nasty surprises there, but at the same time, it's good to know what you're dealing with, I guess. In terms of, again, going back to the specific tattoos, there's one I saw on your website, which, again, going back to the film, we're not watching for today's podcast, but the Eastern Promises, I noticed you had the stars on the knees. What's that one all about?
So, the stars, that's the top-ranking tattoo in the Russian mafia, in the Vodova. So, basically, when you're in the mafia, when you are part of it, you are a vor. You're called a thief. I am a thief. When you become a don, a mafia don, a top ranker, you become a thief in law. So when you become a thief, you get an 8-point star, 2 8-point stars on your just underneath your shoulders, and you can also get them on your knees. Now, if on the knees, it means you'll never bow to authority. You won't work with the police, with the prison authorities. You will be hostile towards them. And once you progress to a Don level, the 8-point star becomes a 16-point star. You expand it. 16-point star, incredibly rare. I used to say to the people training, they'd say to me, "What would you do if you come across this?" And I say, "Honestly, I don't know. I've asked organised crime, and I've asked, and they all say, let's hope we never do."
Yeah.
But so that's it means a Don, basically, a serious guy if you come across these stars.
Yeah, and most likely he's not anyone you're coming across is going to be somebody that he's kind of sent on his bidding. So he's probably not going to be, just wandering about the place.
A 16-point star would never get his hands dirty, and that's actually a common theme of the Russian mafia. In the UK and in Europe, they don't get their hands dirty. They use other criminal gangs to do their work for them. They pass it down the chain, and from the Balkans, Turks, these mafias do the bidding of the Vodafone in the UK and in Europe.
Yeah. But presumably there's sort of some intimidation going on behind the scenes or money or some combination of both to, get things rolling, I'm guessing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they're without a shadow of a doubt, they are the most powerful criminal network in the world. If anyone's really, I talk about it a lot in the book about how they become so successful. It was all part of the 90s, and the film we're going to watch, you can see it starts from the protection rackets at the local market right up to protection. They were charging protection to the Russian railways and military supplies, and all these things were being funneled through these guys. In the 90s, they were incredibly successful. And then in the 2000s, when things changed for them, they moved west and they just took their activities to Europe and America.
Yeah, for those less familiar with recent Russian history, the 90s were... Obviously, I didn't live in Russia at that time, but they sound really, really chaotic and kind of like a petri dish for that sort of activity, really, just because you've got lots of people in quite desperate situations. And also just not a lot of legal oversight. You went from having a massive, internal security operation, for all its faults, to, really not a lot. If I'm getting my facts right there.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, what happened was in the 90s. Again, I'll talk about it in the book at length. But there's the shock therapy thing that the Americans insisted Russia and the IMF insisted Russia do to turn the economy from communism to capitalism, and it caused economic chaos. It meant the police went unpaid for months and months, and when they were paid, it was a pittance. Average wages in Russia in the early 90s were, less than $100 a month, quite a lot less. Pensioners went unpaid, the judiciary went unpaid, so it meant all this was opened up to huge corruption in the police. The best officers all left. Many of them went and worked for organised crime. The ones who stayed were either not so great in quality or very open to corruption. And it's only recently they've really got that under control. And it just created. And you still had the huge natural resources in the country that were auctioned off in corrupt auctions and organised crime got their hands on them, and they almost took over the country. Boris Berezovsky, I'm sure a lot of people know, he ended up dying in London a few years ago. Russia's first billionaire and the godfather of crime in this country, almost ended up, was part of the government at one point, it was in Yeltsin's cabinet, only in a minor position, but that's how far organised crime got.
Oh wow, I knew he was a businessman, but I wasn't really aware of his criminal connections.
Well, at the time of his death, he was wanted in Russia for numerous organised crime activities, murder, kidnapping, extortion. He was wanted in Brazil, he was under investigation in Switzerland. He really was. There's a great book by an American guy who was murdered for the book, The Godfather of the Kremlin, about all his criminal activities. I really recommend that to anyone. And when he died, he was wanted for tons of crime. Real bad guy.
And particularly the fact that you had the law enforcement agencies from other countries besides Russia wanted him for things makes me... This shows how cynical I've got, but tends to make me lend more credence to those allegations, because if it was just the Russians, you'd think, is there some kind of agenda behind this with, the political setup there? I mean, this is getting more political than I normally like to on one of these episodes, but... Sure. But the fact that, as I say, you have these other law enforcement agencies interested.
He's dead now, so we can't rely on for slander. So there's nothing to worry about there.
That's true. Yeah.
But yeah, again, he's in the UK. He hired. He had a PR firm working for him who Margaret Thatcher used to hire, and he was very good at putting his case across in the UK as a champion of democracy and an opponent of Vladimir Putin. But it's absolutely not true, and I'm sure most of your listeners have got a fairly good grasp of Russian history and politics, and they know a little bit about Berezovsky. But yeah, we're going off track a little bit.
You mentioned something called Operation Millennium. Could you tell me a bit about what that was?
Yeah. Well, it's still ongoing. So in the early 2000s, Interpol got a grip of the situation and understood that the Russian, or they called them Eurasian organised crime gangs, but Russian criminals were running riot in Europe, especially Poland, Germany, France have all got extremely strong Russian mafia organisations. Greece and Cyprus as well, very active Russian criminals, and they put together Operation Millennium to draw in everyone's information and get European law enforcement working together to deal with it. It was, I think it still is, one of their top 3 priorities. The top 3 are, in Millennium then, the Vietnamese drug importation and cannabis growing, and people traffic people into Europe to farm cannabis and work in the sex industry. That's a big thing for them. And I think this has changed now, but the third one was the Pink Panthers, who were Serbian and Balkan armed robbers, and they used to do spectacular jewellery raids all around the world. But they're all locked up now.
Okay.
But yeah, look it up. You can Google it, Operation Millennium.
Yeah.
And I think there's a really good report by a Swedish police chief, Walter Kigo, all about Russian criminal activities in Europe, and it's really good. And for a police report, they're normally terribly boring. It's really well written, and I recommend it to anyone with an interest in the subject.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, we'll have to check that out. Okay, so we've obviously done a little bit of a background of Russian organised crime and your work with the police in tackling that, but I think we should probably go watch the film now.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to this.
So what we do, and you as a Russian speaker will possibly be less phased than some people are. We say a word of Russian, and that word is "поехали." Could you explain to first-time listeners what it means and why it's kind of an extra significant Russian word?
So it means "let's go," or I think that's right, isn't it? Isn't it "let's go"?
Yeah, or "we're off," or yeah, all those kind of meanings. Yeah.
Yeah, and when Yuri Gagarin blasted off into space on the see if I get this right, 12th of April 1961.
I'm going to go with that because I know it was 61, but that's more specific than I get.
Yeah, Cosmonauts Day, 12th of April.
There we go.
So when Yuri Gagarin blasted off into space to become the first human to leave planet Earth, he shouted "Поехали!" and it's quite a significant word in Russia.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so that's what we'll say. So 3, 2, 1.
Поехали!
And we're back. We've just watched Aleksei Balabanov's 1997 film Brother, and before we get into discussing what we thought about it, Mark's going to give us a quick summary of the plot. But before we do that, we should probably warn you that there's potential for quite a lot of spoilers. So if you haven't watched it yet and you're bothered about that, probably go and watch it before you listen to the rest of the podcast. And also, perhaps not surprising with the subject of the film, it being a gangster film after all, but there's some pretty grim subject matter. It's not that graphic in terms of what they show on screen, but it's pretty upsetting, and there's including a scene where a rape happens or starts to happen, so that's something to be aware of. Okay, so now I've covered those, over to you, Mark, with the summary.
So the film opens with the hero, Daniel, appearing out of nowhere. There's some sort of music video or advert being shot, and he walks across the main scene. One of the clues to the film, he's wearing a Russian army jacket, which it turns out he's just been demobbed from the army. So he interrupts this film shoot and ends up having a bit of a ruck with some security guards. And that sets out a bit of what type of man Daniel is. He gets in trouble quite easily. He's away with the fairies quite often. But he ends up having a fight and breaking the security guard's arm, and we next see him in the police station with a black eye, and he has a good discussion with the mayor or the mayor of the police, and it turns out that Daniel's father had died in prison in the 80s and was a career criminal, and the police chief offers Daniel a job as he finds out he's just come out of the army. This is 90s Russia, and they needed all the policemen they could get. Daniel turns down the job and heads back to his mother's, and we see his mother berating him, giving him a hard time, and telling him how wonderful his brother in Leningrad or St. Petersburg really is, and how he should be more like him. Next off, Daniel's arriving in St. Petersburg, and we see some more trouble he gets into
fighting in the market, helping a homeless street vendor who's being picked on by some mafiosi types. There's a run-in with some Chechens on the tram where he pulls a gun. And we just see sort of what the guy Daniel is. He's considers himself a bit of a freedom fighter or a bit of a hero, and has no problems getting into trouble.
Yeah, and we also meet his brother, who, as you mentioned, is somewhat the favourite of their mother. That's
right. We meet his brother. He appears, and he's not the light of her life that she says he is. He's quite clearly a gangster, and he's discussing money from some bad guys for a hit. He wants $20,000 to kill someone. And there's a good point here when you first see him discussing it with this mob boss. The guy's wearing this very striking red jacket, and that was a symbol of Russian gangsters in the 90s. Malinovi Pizhak, I think it was called. And yeah, it's quite a subtle thing for us Westerners, but that's a real sign of a Russian gangster back then.
Gotcha.
So we see Daniel's getting into his scrapes. He's meeting up with his brother, and his brother lives in this amazing apartment block just by the Church of the Spilled Blood. You can see it from the window, so we can see his brother's obviously doing very well for himself.
For those who are not familiar with St. Petersburg, the Cathedral in the Spilled Blood it was actually built in the late 19th century, but it looks like a kind of St. Basil's style cathedral. But the reason it's called that is it was on the spot of the assassination of Alexander II. So it's like a very famous landmark in St. Petersburg. So yes, yeah,
it's one of the symbols of the city, and living near it is a sign of great wealth. So so Victor, the mafia, the gangster hitman brothers, living right next to that, so he's obviously doing very well. Gives Daniel a bit of money to go shopping, and we get a bit of retro British. I don't know if you saw it, Alistair, while he's out shopping.
No.
He buys his jumper from Littlewoods.
Oh wow, yes, no, didn't spot that.
Yeah, I saw that. That took me back.
Yes, that name is a bit of a blast from the past. Yeah.
So Daniel's he's in St. Petersburg. He's met up with his gangster brother, and his brother talks him into doing a hit for him. The hit that he's been contracted out to do, that Victor's been given $20,000 to do. He's giving Daniel $2,000 to do it because and he the way he talks Daniel into it is that he can't do it, and only Daniel can do it for him.
Yeah, which tells us a lot about the character of Victor, the older brother. Is he's very keen for somebody else to get their hands dirty rather than him.
Yeah, he's got no problem selling his brother out, and we see that throughout the film. He palms things off to his brother and lets him take all the risks.
Yeah.
So this is when we get our first clue that throughout the film, Daniel talks about his army service when people ask him, and he says, I was just a clerk at HQ. But now we see him doing some recon for this hit that's going to take place in the market against this Chechen crime boss. We see him preparing his weapons, and he looks like he knows what he's doing. He makes a silencer. He does the hit, gets away with it. But the guys contracted out to the guys who hired them to do the hit decide to kill Victor rather than pay him. But it's not Victor there; it's Daniel. So they go after Daniel, and this is when we get the start of the film with the mafia chasing Daniel and his brother, and him avoiding their attempts to kill him, and him taking them out instead.
Yeah, but also taking a bullet himself.
Yeah, he gets winged, doesn't he? He gets just clipped, but he manages to survive.
Yeah, it looks like it's touch and go there for a while, though. You have a scene where he's lying on his back and he's sweating, and it's actually his friend basically sorts out his medical treatment. I can't remember whether he goes to hospital in the end, but they do quite a lot of makeshift things because he doesn't want to go to hospital. So, but yeah, as you say, he pulls through.
Yeah. And this is when we get one of the iconic bits in the film. He pulls through, but he jumps on a tram to escape, like a service tram, and fires off some shots against these mafia guys and ends up killing one of them, I think.
Yes, he does, yeah.
Yeah, and this is when we meet one of the female protagonists of the film, Sveta, the tram driver.
Yes.
So the mafia go hunting for Daniel after he recovers, and now this is where I think there's a bit of a plot hole, when they manage to find Sveta driving the tram, and they try and get information out of her. But I can't understand how they, surely she'd just say it wasn't me, it was a different driver that day.
Yeah. I guess she's just scared and says anything. And I mean, this is probably the most upsetting scene in the film. I mean, she doesn't she doesn't know anything, and they're sort of interrogating her and threatening her, and she can't tell them anything because she just doesn't really know, because he just showed up, just kind of dropped into her life. But they rape her anyway. I mean, you don't...
Well, it's implied that they rape her, isn't it?
Yes, you don't see it happen on screen, but they kind of like partially rip her clothes off, and the implication afterwards is that is what's happened.
Yeah, it's suggested that's what's happened, and so later on, her and Daniel have obviously been an item. They meet up and they've been an item, and they rape her later on, or they attack her later on when they find her.
Yeah. And
so again, all throughout the film, we've got this main mafia guy who we find out is called Roundhead, the one in the raspberry jacket, and the brother sort of setting Daniel up to take him out rather than Victor taking the hit. But Daniel every time survives, and basically it's a bit of a western, I suppose. He survives all these hits and these attempts on him and takes out the bad guys each time.
Yeah. I actually thought he's quite kind of Clint Eastwood-like in his ability to go into a room and shoot multiple people. And although we mentioned he does get shot earlier in the film, but he pulls through some scrapes where you'd expect him to get shot, but he doesn't.
Exactly, and I think one of the themes throughout the film is people ask him about his army service, and he always says, "Oh, I was just a clerk at HQ." But when we see him in action, you think, you get the impression that he's obviously it was a lot more than that.
Yes, that probably is not true. And that's... I definitely wanted to talk about this later, but we might as well mention it now.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the film being well put together, that's a good example of, like, purposeful repetition. It's not like it's just mentioned once and then thrown away. They make a point of, like, different characters asking him, and him just go, repeating this line of, like, no, I was just a clerk, so, But, yeah, that sort of paradox between what you see him being capable of and that explanation, means that you read between the lines, although it's never actually specified.
Mm-hmm.
It's never directly, he doesn't admit at the end, oh yeah, that was a lie. You just know that it was. Yeah,
it's sort of implied, and because of the time that the film takes place, it's just after the first Chechen war. Daniel's obviously been demobbed, and he does have a run-in with these Chechens on the bus, so it's sort of implied that he's served in Chechnya. So Victor sets him up for the final hit with these mafia guys. They've taken over Victor's apartment, and they're sitting there waiting for Daniel, but he obviously senses something's up. He uses his army training once again he buys a shotgun, saws it down, and sneaks into the apartment and takes these guys out, freeing his brother, acting like the hero once again, cleaning the bad guys out of all their cash, and forgiving his brother for all the betrayals. His brother's betrayed him at least 3 times throughout the film, and he shows no malice towards him and just reminisces about their old times together.
Yeah, and his brother is convinced he's for it. He is convinced that Danila's just going to straight up murder him. Just, probably because that's what Victor himself would have done if the roles were reversed, I think.
Yeah, Victor's not a very sympathetic character.
No.
No. I mean, he's quite amusing sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, he thinks his brother's going to pop him, but instead his brother reminds him of the time they went fishing together and gives him a few $1,000s and tells him to go home to mum.
Yeah.
And then we sort of, it all wraps up. He goes, Daniel tries to rekindle his thing with Sveta, but that doesn't work out, and he ends up shooting her husband in the foot before hitchhiking off to Moscow and starting his new life in Moscow with his pockets full of dollars and a shotgun in his jacket.
So yeah, that's a fantastic summary. Just when you compress the film down like that, it sounds like it's quite exciting, just describing the events, and it's only a 90-minute film, but it feels kind of longer than that. And I don't mean this as a criticism, but it's kind of it's not the movie that I was expecting to watch in a way, but we can kind of get onto that a bit later. Before we get into that, I wanted to ask, it was set in 1997, which is when, as we mentioned in part 1, when you first went to Russia. How close does the depiction of Russia at that time chime in with your memories of going there for the first time?
I'll tell you what, I think there's a lot of accuracies to this film, and part of it almost feels like a historical document, because you see that time, 97, Russia was really at its bottom. '98 we had the currency crash, and things were getting worse actually. So, and the film's, I think it's shot in sort of autumn time, isn't it? 'Cause it's very grey and dark, and although St. Petersburg is beautiful, it looks quite miserable.
Yeah. I mean, there's no snow yet, which makes me think, autumn time. And they make a point as far as, like, I guess the film stock that they used. It has a kind of, not, I don't want to say sepia, because the sepia tone implies, like, fond nostalgia. It's kind of more of this sort of slightly muddy, yellow-brown kind of tint to it, almost. And it just makes it look really, really grim.
And I think it was a grim time. There, it was a chaotic time, and you look at the film. I mean, part of one of the things I like about it, reminiscing, the way it went, they mentioned the currency and the ruble and the prices, and the prices are crazy because they 78,000 rubles for a CD. I think 6,000 ruble fine on the bus, and a million two for this shotgun, and it was only a couple of $100.
Yeah. Because people from the UK and from the US, when they first go to Moscow, will have to get their head around the fact that rubles are worth a lot less than dollars or pounds. But yeah, those are crazy out of whack with what it is now. I mean, even though there have been a few shifts recently, but yeah, that was quite weird to me. I was like, nope. This is very difficult to understand how much stuff actually costs.
Yeah, and I like the way they don't shy away from any of that. So it's again, you can look back and you see that the currency problems they were having there. I mean, all the flats they use are very decayed and obviously were beautiful 50 or 100 years ago, but now are in disrepair. And I think it is a great fit. It's one of the first films I recommend to people when we talk about Russian crime or Russia in the 1990s, because it looks like Russia did then. There's no dressing it up to be better than it was. That's how bad things were.
Yeah, cool. The other thing I wanted to ask was, rewatching this one, was there anything that surprised you this time round? Stuff that you didn't remember from before, or something you just noticed for the first time this watch?
Well, some of the places, those familiar with St. Petersburg will sit there and go, "Oh, I know where that is. I know where that is," but. Yeah. I don't want to go on about that too much, but yeah, the Malinovi pijak, the raspberry jackets, I thought that was a nice touch, as I mentioned earlier. The police officer, the police chief offering Daniel a job on the spot because they're desperate for manpower. Things like that I enjoyed.
Also the family tie there, because that was basically because he'd known and liked Danila and Victor's dad, so it's kind of like an allusion to, well, I mean, it happens here, and I'm sure it happens in plenty of other places as well, but often things are about who you know, and that's definitely very much a Russian cultural element too.
Oh, very much so, definitely.
Because it doesn't really make sense that, given how he's acquainted with this guy, he comes across this guy having a scrap, that automatically strikes you as, oh, this guy will be great police material,
I think that's more due to the crisis they were going through in the 90s. They couldn't hire anyone because they went unpaid for so long, and the paying conditions were so terrible that they basically, if you finished your army service, you could join the police. So I think there's a touch of that.
But yeah, you didn't necessarily want to, because you probably heard the rumours that it wasn't necessarily a good way to end up with money in your pocket. Yeah, wow, it's hard to imagine living through that, and I think that's definitely very important context for people who want to. I mean, I never went to Russia in the 90s, but just from talking to people who were a bit older when I was there, it's difficult to imagine living through, such a time of upheaval.
Alex, I could just say, regarding that question, rewatching it, there's a minor character called Kat, who I think he bumps into 3 times.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, is she a prostitute? Is she a drug addict or what? And she's only in a few scenes, but I thought she was brilliant, and I looked her up after an IMDb, and she hardly did any other films. He bumps into her on the street with his player, and I just thought she played her role excellently, but doesn't seem like she did anything else after that. I don't know if you noticed her.
Yeah, it did. I mean, she's quite a striking character. I mean, we could talk about a little bit about the structure of the film, and she's a good example, is that you have this through line of the gangster plot, but you also have quite a lot of scenes interspersed that are really, like, quite tangential to the main action, and she's a perfect example. He just meets her on, I think initially, like, either in or outside a record shop. He spends a lot of time doing stuff to do with him being really into music, and he's in CD shops quite a lot and asking them, do you have this CD? And I think that's how he bumps into her. But it's not directly, quotes relevant, unquote, to the main plot, but it is interesting in fleshing out him as a character and just the overall, like, feel to the film. So yeah, she was interesting, and she's quite a contrast to Sveta in terms of, like, Sveta seems to kind of have a more sort of, I don't know, I don't even want to say stable existence, but it's slightly more kind of responsible and grown up in that she has a job. It's not a fantastically wonderful job, but she's doing that, whereas Kat, yeah, just, I don't know. It was, like you said, hard to pin down what she actually is, other than a young person in the search of a good time. Not you want to criticise people for that, but you know what I mean.
I do. I think she's a great character, and like you say, she's not pivotal to the film at all. If she wasn't there, it wouldn't really matter. But she does. I thought she steals her scenes when she's on.
Yeah,
and perhaps the contrast with Sveta, maybe it's because of that. Because you do think, well, why is he going for Sveta, the older, more boring woman? Why isn't he going for this crazy cat? But yeah, I don't know the answer.
Yeah, but it does just fills in a bit more about his character. I mean, it's hard to say what exactly it does, but yeah, you can see he's interested in both of them for kind of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, in terms of his relationship with Sveta, that's another good example of his naivety, really, because, and this is into massive spoiler territory. I mean, we mentioned that she gets back with her, I guess it's husband, but we also find out, the reason Danila shoots the husband is not, it's because he's been beating Sveta, so he kind of like thinks that this will solve the problem, that like he'll learn a lesson, but he also is quite surprised when Sveta doesn't leave her husband for him. So I thought that was interesting, because normally the stereotype is that women are more attached after people have hooked up, but really it seems like it's Danila. Like Sveta, it seemed like she's not happy in her relationship, but there's a stability there, sort of, and a knowing what to expect from her husband that she really doesn't think she'll get from Danila. So she ultimately decides to, better the devil kind of thing. At least that's how I read that. So I thought that was interesting, just from the point of view of, like, Danila being like, oh, I thought you were going to be with me. Right, didn't expect that. Yeah, he's so interesting. I mean, he's pretty much the whole film, really, but he's quite a paradoxical character. Like, you say, he can obviously handle himself, but you're constantly reminded that he's a very young guy. He's been through a lot, but he's not totally he is a veteran, but he's not a grizzled veteran in the way you would kind of like stereotypically imagine that, I guess.
No, I'd agree with everything you said there, Alistair. Like, Sveta, when we're used to, in Hollywood films, he'd shoot the husband and she'd fall into his arms and they'd leave happily ever after.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a surprise. And you're right. He is a paradoxical character because he's killing these people, although they're all bad people, but he's giving money to people he can help. He gets up. There's one point he gets a film. He watches a film of his favourite singer, that Nautilus Pompilus, and he's upset because it's pirated. And he gets quite offended by that. And you think, a guy who's going around killing people is upset by a pirated video.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of paradoxes in him. How kind he is to his brother, despite his brother almost getting him killed at least 3 times.
Yeah, and not even, like, accidentally, like...
Yeah, intentionally getting him killed 3 times.
Yeah, Well, it isn't like the brother sort of like accidentally nearly got him killed through bad planning. It's like the brother basically did a calculated risk and went, yeah, I'm fine putting him in harm's way like that. It's, it's his problem, not mine. So yeah, his brother is a nasty piece of work. This is very much an aside, but I wanted to mention I actually recognise the brother from another Russian film I've watched. The actor's called, he's also Victor. He's Victor Sukhorukhov. I'm going to go with that as an attempt at pronunciation. But he also turns up in, I don't know, have you seen Bakenbardi, Sideburns? By Yuri Mamin.
I haven't seen that, but I have seen that. I've seen him in a few things, and I saw him fairly recently on Russian TV. He popped up in some drama on NTV, and I was, it's Victor from Brat there.
Oh, okay, yeah, because, Sideburns is a very weird film. We've actually covered another Yuri Mamin film on here, Window to Paris, but yeah, so it was kind of like, oh, I actually know this guy. I've been watching enough Russian films that we're getting some recurring actors. So it was cool seeing him pop up, but that's very much an aside.
I'm going to have to IMDb him now, but I've seen him a few times, definitely.
Yeah. He's kind of an very interesting face. He's definitely like a character actor, I think you'd say.
But that's an interesting point, actually, Aleksei, because apart from him, and obviously Bodorov, who died soon, 5 years after, I don't think I can have seen any of the other actors in anything.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And I looked Kat up because I thought her performance was really good, and she did nothing after this.
Huh. Wow.
So I don't know. I'd imagine it's a very low budget film, so I don't know if that's why.
Yeah, and I talked about it not being that exciting, and I think that's partly a reflection of like the action scenes are really quite short, so you don't have like massive shootouts with bits of buildings exploding everywhere. They're quite like almost blink and you miss them for the most part. But yeah, that doesn't mean to say that I think this is a bad film. Like the more I've thought about it, the more it's kind of rewarded putting that extra mental effort in. It's so yeah, it's an interesting film in that regard. Like I wouldn't say this is a thrill ride, but it is, as I say, thought-provoking.
I think it's, very, very thought-provoking, very interesting is a boring word to use, but
sure.
it kept me gripped all the way through. I think you learn a lot about the country at the time because it's so different now. And those action sequences, I suppose they're just how things really are. They're more true to life,
Yeah. There's no one kind of like diving through the air shooting two pistols in slow motion. Although those films are fun to watch too. Don't get me wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you mentioned in passing the Leningrad thing. I thought that was an interesting detail because it's very deliberately, it's 1997. I even spotted that there's a calendar on the wall that says 1997, so that's clearly like subtly making the point that this isn't 1991 or 1992 and people are still getting used to the idea that things have changed. This is already like 5 years in. It's not like it's a slip of the tongue or at the time, at the point where people wouldn't have got used to the idea. So it almost feels like the film's making the point of like the country struggling to move on from its past, or maybe particularly just those characters, because it's not just the mother, although she's the main person who does it, but also Danila says Leningrad quite a few times. So I guess that's just the influence of his mum, maybe. I don't know. But I thought that was a really cool detail.
Well, I know that was quite common at the time. When I first came here, people still called it Leningrad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the
even that long after?
Yeah. I mean, I was living here in '99, and older people would call it Leningrad. And I mean, the county, if you like, St. Petersburg is in, is Leningrad Oblast, Leningrad Division. You know?
Yeah. I always read that as it's because the same is true with Yekaterinburg. That's still in Sverdlovsky Oblast. So it's kind of almost like, again, reading too much into it. Like sometimes it feels like there's kind of a new coat of paint, but underneath there's still quite a lot of the old Soviet Union left, which is kind of inevitable when you have, a system running for that long. But it is funny that they changed the one that foreigners will be aware of, but not the one that people who live there will know about. Or whether it's just some kind of like compromise on the fact that
I mean, you're the Moscow expert.
Yeah, always careful about using the word expert, but yeah.
Well, more than me, I'm not very au fait with Moscow. I mean, is the train station still Leningradsky Vokzal, or?
It is, yeah.
So yeah, it's still all. You don't notice it so much, I suppose, when you're into it. But if you were a foreigner who came here the first time, you would be a bit, Leningrad.
Hang on, that doesn't exist anymore, or that's not what it's called. And yeah, I think I've sort of talked about a slightly cynical point of view of just giving it some window dressing, but I think also from conversations I've had with my wife Carrie and that she's had with Russians she's talked to, is there was quite a debate in the early 90s about what we're going to do with this historical baggage, because certainly when the communists came to power and once they'd won the Civil War by the early 1920s, they just made a point of just like flattening everything that was old almost and just renaming everything and just sort of trying to deny that the past was a thing. And I think in the early 90s there was sort of we don't want to be communist anymore, but at the same time, we don't want to just pretend like that 70 years didn't happen. So maybe they're having the two names around in terms of like the region versus the city itself is a way of acknowledging and not totally whitewashing that past. I don't know. But yeah, it's interesting for you to say that wasn't just a choice of the filmmakers. It was more like a reflection of reality on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how weird it would be. Like, it's a bad analogy because Manchester has never been the capital of Britain, but just a city as important. It's not London, but it's very important. If that suddenly changed to something else and then changed back, like, yeah, how British people would deal with that name change, yeah, hard to imagine.
It seems like Britain's almost as chaotic at the moment as Russia was in the 90s, so you never know, Alistair.
Oh, don't get me started. Yeah. We'll have people deciding that certain cities just sound too European, so we'll have to change that, yeah. But probably best get back to the film. But I know we've talked about him already, but I want to talk a bit more about Bodrov and just, what an interesting casting choice and all that. I mean, it's difficult to know where to start. I mean, it's interesting that he's quite baby-faced.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you know how old he was at the time? Because he looks like 21 or something, but I wouldn't...
I looked up on IMDb a couple of days ago, so I may be misremembering, but assuming I'm not, I think he was born 1975, so he would have been 21, 22.
Blimey. So he was that young?
Yeah, he was.
So he was... Because he died in 2002.
Yes.
So 27, is that right? Am I got that right?
Yeah, no, that's... Maybe I am getting that... I think I must be getting that wrong then. So maybe he was slightly older, but he certainly looks very fresh-faced, and I just think that's an interesting, atypical casting choice for a gangster movie. You'd normally go with somebody who looks tougher,
And yeah, I'm looking it up now. So he was born in 71, December 71. So he'd have been 25, 26 when this... Well, maybe younger when this film was made.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I think that's part of it, isn't it? He's not your typical gangster. He's not a John Wayne or a Clint Eastwood. He's an unassuming provincial Russian guy.
Yeah. On the other hand, because of his army days, he can totally handle himself. I mean, you talked about the preparation scene for like the initial hit in the market, but I thought the one that was really interesting to watch was him preparing for the final kind of like showdown sort of duel. Well, not even duel. It's like he's got to rush into this apartment and he's totally dependent on the element of surprise and being able to take everyone out. But it's a bit of a trope in cinema, like the whole like suiting up for the battle type thing. But it's a trope because it works really well. So just seeing him like soaring off the shotgun, some of the preparations he goes to, like down to taking those shotgun cartridges apart and then replacing the ball bearings with the ends of nails to make it nastier. It's kind of like, this guy kind of knows what he's doing, but yeah, it sort of works really well with the whole that side of his character, I guess.
It doesn't. A bit of a spoiler. Tell me to be quiet if you like. But I know in the second film, Brat 2, which was a mega success and had a much bigger budget, we do find out a bit of Daniel's backstory, and a lot of these unanswered questions are answered.
Yeah, but I think it's cool that they didn't answer them in this one. And this is a film where you genuinely feel like a sequel isn't just well, let's just make more money. You want to find out more about this character because they haven't just spilt everything in the first.
Oh, certainly. There are loads of questions. You watch it and you think, you want to know more about him.
Yeah. I mean, I thought again, in terms of the period detail, it was quite funny to see a Walkman as much.
Yeah. There's the Walkman. There's a top-loading video as well, you see.
Yeah.
There is some stuff that takes you back. And the big mobile phones.
Oh, yeah. But I think in terms of a character who spent that much time, with headphones in, I think it's a superficial comparison, but I don't know if you saw Baby Driver. That's probably, the only other film I can think of where as much of a point is made about he really likes his music kind of thing. But obviously this is a much older film. But also it has that kind of gangster connection. But I thought that was interesting. And it also, I wasn't in love with the soundtrack, but I liked the repetition of the same song kept coming on. And you think, oh, well, that's, why are you playing that again? That's boring. Let's listen to something else. But when you're really into a song or a band, you will be listening to the same song probably quite a lot if you're really into that at that particular moment. So that, again, is just... It's a clever choice, and that's one of the things I really respect about this film, is it seems like a lot of thought has gone in.
Well, the soundtrack is by a group, Nautilus Pompilus, and I would say, in my opinion, they're the sort of second biggest Russian rock group ever after Kino. The lead singer, Vyacheslav Batusov, he makes a couple of cameos in the film, where the party scene, and he is a big star in Russia, so...
Yeah.
The fact that they got him I think is quite good.
Yeah. I mean, it goes to show that even though there wasn't that much money behind the film, there was enough, I guess, artistic credibility of the director and the people working on it that they were able to convince this big star, this is something you want to be a part of, And I think it's isn't it a Nautilus Pompilus song that they're recording the video for, that Danila makes his initial appearance in the film. Yes,
do you know what? That's a good point, and I went to look it up, because the song's Krylia, which is one of their Wings, which is one of their big hits. But I thought, I wonder if that's the actual video. I'll have to YouTube that, and I haven't done it, so I will do that, Alistair.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. Yeah, because literally the lyrics that you can hear are what's happening in the in the video until Danila kind of blunders in and messes it up. Yeah, it's so interesting. And going back to the Walkman, that's part of the him being sort of naive and young, is that even though there's these guys out to get him, he's just walking down the street with his headphones in his ears, not particularly paying attention, and it's only the fact that slightly implausibly, the bullet hits the Walkman and tears that apart, that he survives and is able to shoot back and kill this guy. So he's on edge enough that he's packing heat, but not on edge and paying attention enough that he's actually listening to his surroundings. So I thought that was kind of funny, but another good detail.
I think you're right. I think that, again, backs up the point that he's young and naive, and he's not Clint Eastwood looking around every corner waiting for these baddies.
Yeah, even though he can also do that,
Mm-hmm. So, can I ask you, Alistair, because this is one of my favourite Russian films, and it's one that I recommend to everyone, but as a film buff, did you like it, or? Like
I said, I wasn't riveted. I'd love to see it on a big screen. That would be really cool. I think it definitely merits a rewatch. So it's one I would cautiously recommend. I wouldn't say it's fantastically exciting, but it is, like I said, rewards further kind of thinking. It's like surprisingly, I don't want to even say surprisingly deep for a gangster film, because I mean, obviously, The Godfather and those films have a lot of depth, but it is one of those genres that people kind of like do sometimes write off as being superficial, and I like that this didn't have. It wasn't flashy or kind of glamorizing that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'd definitely recommend it, but I'd say it's pretty grim. So know that going in.
I mean, that's a fair criticism of 90% of Russian gangster films. I mean, one of the problems with this film, it did spawn loads and loads of gangster films, and most of them are awful.
What should we stay away from? No, I won't make you name names. But
I'll name one. I absolutely hate it, and it's really popular. Is Boomer? Have you seen that?
No, I haven't. But yes, that is definitely one of the ones that I've heard of and know is super famous.
Yeah, it's a mid-2000s gangster film all about these guys in a BMW, and it's awful, but people love it here. So, but avoid like the plague.
Gotcha. Duly noted. But yeah, I could definitely think of some directors, naming no names, in the West who are kind of guilty of that sort of like, oh, isn't it cool going around killing people? Mm-hmm. But yeah, awesome.
But I'd say this isn't like a Russian version of Death Wish. I wouldn't put that on it.
No,
I'd say it's much more nuanced than that, and there are a lot of underlying stories, and the characters are far. There's more depth to them.
Yeah, and sometimes you want to watch a film where it's just action packed and excitement all the way, but yeah, plenty of time you want to watch something that's a bit more, like you say, challenging. So yeah, super. I think that's all I have. Okay, well, Mark, thank you so much for being a guest and sharing your expertise on this particular element of Russian society, I guess you'd say. But before you go, you obviously mentioned your book, Thief in Law. Where can we find that?
Thanks, Alice. So my book, Thief in Law, it's by me, Mark Bullen. You can buy it on Amazon. It's available to pre-order now in both the UK, the US, Germany, all over the world. And in America, it's in all good bookshops, I believe, and some bad ones too. You can find anything out about me on my website, markgbullen.com, and I'll be doing a tour. I'll be back in the UK fairly soon, and I'm doing a tour of the police training project I originally wrote, all about the Russian mafia. It's really good. It was so good I got recommended to the Americans, and I ended up going to teach the FBI. So if you want to get all the insider and police information all about the Russian mafia and their tattoos and stuff the public don't know about, come to one of my talks. I will be in London, Manchester, Bristol, Leicester, Leighton Buzzard, Cologne, and somewhere else in France in September. All the details are on my website, markgbullen.com. And if anyone wants to know anything about Russian tattoos, they can email me. I'm quite happy to answer questions and help people out. I don't ask any money for it. So, yeah, please get in touch if you're interested.
Yeah, cool. So, I think you've definitely whetted people's appetite for that. You're also on Twitter as well, is that right?
Oh, thank you, Aleksei. You're the professional here. I can see that.
That's the first time anyone has said that.
Oh, no. All the bases ticked here. I'm at Mark G. Bullen on Twitter, and you can just search my book, Thief in Law, and you'll find out bits about me.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much, Mark, again. And that's all for us for this time. So, do svidaniya, folks.
Do svidaniya.
So that's it for this episode, but before I go, I'd like to thank Sasha Ilukovich and the Highly Skilled Migrants for the use of their song Cold in our intro. You can find that song and the rest of their back catalogue on Bandcamp and Spotify. If you're enjoying the show, please consider supporting us by leaving a rating at Apple Podcasts or at podchaser.com. That second one, Podchaser, even lets you rate individual episodes, so if this episode particularly stood out to you, you can let other listeners know that you enjoyed it. Recommending the show on social media is hugely helpful as well. If you can spare a moment or two to do that, it would really make my day. Thank you very much. Speaking of social media, please find us and say hi on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram. You can also drop us a line at roostfilsunite@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.